gotten super far into it. We were talking about fabrics and your supplies. So let's start with the fabric. You want it to be something relatively lightweight. Um, this one here, I'm sure my friends are going to hate me when I wear this out because it's sparkly, so it's going to like glitter everywhere. Um, and so with this, I always measure what size bolt I get because I'm never sure if it's going to be a 54 or a 60-yard bolt that I pulled out. So let me see what I've got here. So this one here is a 54. And I'm doing mine in 2 different colors. So I'm going to kind of layer mine just to add some little bit of extra dimension and color. A lot of people will use single colors, and that's completely fine. It really depends on what you're using it for because a lot of people layer these. I also have, this is just your basic cotton poly blend. Like I said, I took a look at these colors and I was like, wow, those look really nice together. And so if you're out looking at your store, it doesn't have to be super, oh yeah, this is a cotton poly blend. Just wanted to double check that I wasn't wrong. And this, I mean, $2.99 a yard if you're paying full price. Which I think we've all had a discussion that I strongly encourage you to use coupons and sales when you're buying your fabric. Another thing you're going to want to make sure you have is your trusty measuring tape. They come in lots of colors. Mine just happens to be pink. I'm not sure how I managed to get that to happen. You are going to need elastic. At least 2 inches and at least a yard of it. So this I bought at the store pre-cut. It's a total of 3 yards? 2 yards of elastic. So that's double what I'll need just in case, I need to go a little bit bigger than that. You'll also, of course, need your thread. For mine, I am using an all-purpose, and this one happens to be a variegated color. Since I'm using 2 different colors of material, I figured that's going to be the best way for me to get, so that way my thread blends as well as possible. You're going to need some pinking shears. Because if you don't, a lot of times your fabric's going to start to fray. And if your fabric starts to fray, that's a problem. One of the reasons why this is kind of, is most people require a serger to do this because of the fabrics you're using. If you use the pinking shears, it's going to minimize your fraying from your fabric. It's going to eliminate that need to have a serger. I would still recommend probably when you're running it through your sewing machine to use a zigzag stitch though. That'll just give you that little bit of extra stability to just kind of hold everything in place. You'll also need something to mark. This is a mechanical sewing pencil. So it has that special lead in it that, it writes on fabric and then it washes off when I'm done. It has a little eraser on it. I just usually don't ever need to use my eraser. Well, okay, that's a lie. I just usually use a separate eraser. But these do come with erasers on them. So this can be a whole lot of fun for a lot of reasons. Also, depending on what type of space you need, you're going to need a cutting surface. So since I'm up here in my sewing room, I'm going to use my cutting board here as my cutting surface. I may curse at myself for this later, but for now, this is what I'm going to use. And then, of course, I have my clear ruler, which is going to help me with some of my measurements. So, how are you going to measure yourself for this skirt? This is how I do it. And the one thing her pattern did talk about was leaving room for a seam allowance. As well as for some hems. And keep in mind, you're going to also need to take into account your waistband as well. So without further ado, I'm going to stand up and show you how I do my measurements when I have to measure from the floor up. So if I'm measuring from the floor up, one, I want to make sure I'm not wearing any shoes. See, bare feet, bare feet. This is not the most accurate, but it will get you at least a ballpark. And when it comes to a skirt like this, you can kind of modify from here on out. So you want to make sure you have your edge on the floor. Very carefully just tuck your foot over the little metal tab. Then gently pull up to approximately where your waist is going to land. For me, that's 41 inches. From the floor up to my waist. So now what you're going to do is you're going to want to add 3 inches. So that's going to bring us up to 44. And then we're going to take away 2 inches. And that brings us to 42. So 42 is the length we're working with for the total skirt. Now, with the way that she did it in the pattern and the way that I'm going to do it, showing you the pattern, is we did 4 tiers. So what you do with that 42 is you take your trusty calculator and you divide that by your number of tiers. So I get to my trusty little calculator here. And I say I've got 42 inches. I'm going to divide that by 4. That means that each of my tiers is going to be 10.5 inches long. So the neat thing with the way that this works is because we've determined that our fabric has folds. And those folds run along the other side of your bolt. So you're like, that doesn't look like 54 inches. Well, that's because the fabric is folded in half. So one of your edges on the bolt of fabric is going to be a fold. So I'm going to start with my more solid fabric because this is what I'm going to make my waistband out of and my top tier. So, and this too, this also has it right there along the top. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get that out of the way to start with. I'm going to go this way. And one of the nice things about using a board like this is that the board actually has some measurements on there for you. And it can help you kind of keep things straight, so to speak. And that is another reason why I also like using the clear ruler. Because the clear ruler is going to help you as well. So I'm going to scoot this down just a little bit, and I hope everyone can still see what I'm doing here. Now, I had mentioned the pinking shears in order to avoid fabric fray. What you're going to see me do to cut this first, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of additional space to do it with, I am going to use my rotary cutter. Where did I put my rotary cutter? There it is. It's a fabric pizza wheel, basically. It helps me be able to cut in one simple motion, and then I can go back and trim it up. So for my waistband, I want to give myself 8 inches. So I'm going to move this back over here just so that it's out of the way. I'm going to make sure that my fabric is square before I start cutting. All right. Then I'm going to use this to measure out my 8 inches. Then I'm going to take my pencil here, and I'm going to make a mark. The lead in here is white, so that is what makes it kind of nice to work with. Because once I do this, and I line it all up, and I mark where the 8-inch mark is, I use my clear ruler. I line it up at the bottom, make sure everything's square and flush. I make one solid line. And then because I mentioned I was going to need to give myself a little bit of extra leeway, I'm going to give myself about, say, 1/2 inch. So with the clear ruler, I can get myself some more light so I can better see that white line I just made on this very light colored fabric. Sometimes I don't think these things through when I start doing them, but that's okay. So, okay, we have very fine white line. I'm going to line that up there. And that is where I'm going to use my pizza wheel. So I'm just going to lay this here. And as you can see, minus a little spot down here. Bob's your uncle. I'm going to set this off to the side because, like I said, this is going to be the piece I'm going to use for my waistband. Because it's a little bit narrower than the other pieces. So now, one of the things we said was that each of our layers, according to the trusty calculator, was going to be, did we say 10 and a half? I think 10 and a half. Let me just double check. Yes, 10 and a half inches. So, I'm going to bring this back over this way. I'm going to unroll another piece here. Going to measure out 10 and a half inches. Then I'm going to give myself just a little bit of wiggle room here. A little more wiggle room than that. There we go. Because doing it the way I just did it was a little bit more difficult than I was expecting. And sometimes when you're using these, if you have like this edge here that isn't, there we go, right on your board, makes it a little bit more difficult, but not by much. And the nice thing that this does is this is going to help you keep your fabric straight. It's going to help you keep those clean edges, which are going to help make your seams a little bit easier to work with. And here in a bit, I'm going to have to find my other pencil lead because I'm running out very quickly. Oh, there we go. No, now I got another piece in. Okay, we're good. And like I said, just because I know that I'm going to need to cut with my pinking shears, and I'm trying to keep, the straighter edges to make that initial cut, that's the only reason I'm giving myself this extra half inch here. So I'm probably using a little bit more fabric than is necessary, but not by a whole lot. And so we have 2. And I'm going to cut a couple more of this, and then we're going to go on to the other fabric to cut that out. And then that way I can kind of show you like how you start pinning these together. So that way when we come back on Saturday for part 2, we can make sure that we have enough time to go ahead and get through the whole sewing portion. So that way, if you guys have any questions, I'm here to help you answer them. Or maybe if I have questions or I run into problems, you guys will be there to kind of help talk me through it. You know, one thing about costuming and cosplay is there is like a lot of work involved. You know, you can always commission people, which is always great. You know, it really helps not only to promote the craft and to promote what you do, but it also helps, you know, kind of keep, you know, promoting creativity through every facet of it. So let me see here. Yeah, I'll do 2 more of these and then we'll move on to the next part, because I think by then you guys will definitely, you know, you guys are going to be just as much a pros at this as I am. And then I'll show you about cutting with those pinking shears, so that way you can see what I'm talking about when I say that they give it kind of a unique edge. And if you wonder what that noise you're hearing is there's minor little folds in the fabric. Nothing that's a big deal. It's something that really, like, it's not an imperfection or anything. So it just makes it a little bit tricky when you are drawing these lines, because when you're just drawing along that, it just kind of, the fabric will kind of bunch up a little bit. And that's fine. It happens. Alright, make sure I got it lined up there. Flush. So, like, if you can take a look here, like, my edges are really, really super straight. And that's kind of the cool thing about using that rotary cutter with that plastic ruler, is the rotary cutter with the plastic ruler is going to definitely help you keep those clean, flat edges. So that way, you know, when you have, especially if it's like something along the bottom that you're going to have to hem, it's going to just help keep you with those clean lines. So that's something that's always kind of fun for folks. Or something that people struggle with a lot is, you know, if your edges aren't even and sometimes you're trying to attach it to another fabric, sometimes trying to figure out, like, hey, am I sewing a straight line? It can be a little bit tricky. But like I said, that's why using the rotary cutter really, really helps with that. All right, we'll go ahead and do one more of these. I want to say in total you should need, depending upon, of course, your height, anywhere from 9 to 12 yards. If you're a little bit shorter, then of course you won't need as much fabric. If you're a little bit taller, you may need a little bit more. Or if you want to do more tiers, then of course naturally you're going to need to make sure you may need to have just a little bit of extra fabric for that. But like I said, something like a broadcloth, which is just a basic poly cotton blend, like I said, not super expensive. And that's kind of the fun part about cosplay as well, is it's as expensive as you make it, to be honest. You know, with cosplay, you can spend lots of money on really high-end fabric, or you can, you know, spend a medium amount on, you know, it's really up to you. You know, I've seen people achieve the same look with $3 fabric as they have with $10.99 fabric. So sometimes it may require a little bit of work. You may need a little bit of additional, you know, embellishments, things of that nature to kind of get the full look that you're going for. But it really depends. Like, there should be, you know, cosplay is for everybody, in my opinion. You should always feel that, you know, you always have an option. So, okay, we've got 4 there for part of the skirt. That'll probably get us part of our tiers, because I'm doing 2 tiers in this, along with the waistband, and 2 tiers in the darker fabric. Now, the darker fabric, I'm not sure how that's going to work with this rotary cutter, but we're going to find out. The nice thing about darker fabric, however, is that it is a no fray. So that's kind of a plus in my book right now, because that is just, if it's not going to fray on me, that makes me happy. Is this a 54? Does it tell me? I'm going to measure it and find out, because I thought these were both 54s, but this one's looking longer. Okay, it's a 44. That's fine. I can still make it work. I may have to just cut myself a couple extra pieces. So yeah, it is good to know what length you're buying when you buy it off the bolt. Like I said, I have a tendency to buy the bolt. So a bolt is on average 10 yards of fabric. So, hey, if you are fortunate enough and able to do that, I'd strongly recommend it. Because that way you at least know how much fabric you're starting with, and you do have the whole bolt to measure and get some of that additional information from. So what I'm going to have to do is move this a little bit. No. That's all right. I'll make it work. The reason I'm saying no is because, unlike the other one, this is a stretch fabric too. I didn't notice that. That's all right. I'll make it work. Because these are the things that I have chosen. These were my choices. Nobody else made them for me. So we're going to get out here to our 10.5 mark. And I'm going to run that mark right here. Okay, so that didn't work out quite as well as I had hoped. I can still kind of see my line. So since I can kind of see my line, I'm just going to take my pinking shears and I'm just going to cut this one. We're not going to do the rotary cutter. We're just going to take and we're going to just cut along. I'm going slow so that I can make sure I don't completely lose my line. Okay. There we go. We got one cut. And see, the nice thing about these ones that I have, they have a lock on them. So when I'm not using them, I can do that to make sure I don't cut myself or anything that I wasn't planning on cutting. So yeah, this is kind of, I know, the boring part of cosplay is doing all this cutting of the fabric. That's why a lot of times if I'm not doing something like a sew along, I'm going to try to cut all of this out in advance. So that way, basically, all we're doing is we're just sewing. We're working on the techniques, we're putting it together, and that's all we're working on. I'm trying to get myself a little thicker line here this go round. Or not. Okay. So yeah, this fabric is totally not being as cooperative as the last batch of fabric. And sometimes that's going to happen. Me and fabric have disputes on a regular basis. So, you know, don't be too concerned if your fabric isn't doing exactly what you want. Fabric is very finicky, to say the least. All right, so I think you guys have figured out what you're gonna have to do to cut this fabric. I'm gonna go ahead and finish cutting this out. And then on Saturday, go ahead and tune in so that way we can go ahead and we'll finish this project then. It's probably gonna be a few hours because the sewing does take a little bit of time. But I'll show you how to pin all your pieces together and then keep it moving forward from there. So, you know, hey guys, this has been fun. This is Shield Maiden SA with Geeks of the Web. As always, fly your geek flags high. Till next time, everybody.